And as promised, today we've got an incredibly special guest. We've got the brand new to us Superintendent of Schools, Dr. Linus Guillory. Linus, who I know is a Texas A&M alum, but I don't know much more than that, and I can't wait to learn. Linus, thanks for coming on the show.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tommy, for having me.
And I'm going to call you Linus because I kind of first name basis everybody, but I promise you in person I will call you Dr. Guillory. Tell us where you come from. Tell us what you're like. Tell us what you've been up to since birth.
Well, that's a long, laborious story, so we won't dig too deep. But I am a native Texan, so I'm originally from the Houston area. So I use that as an anchor point for folks. I grew up in a small town, Hempstead, Texas. In that, and way back when I graduated many, many moons ago, there were, I think, if I remember correctly, 51 that graduated that year, so a very small class. When I graduated, I then went on to Texas A&M, so going from a very small high school to now being in a freshman class at Texas A&M, where one of my science classes had more than 300 students in it, which was more than I think in our entire high school at the time. From Texas A&M, I then began a career in teaching in the greater Houston area in Aldine ISD. And at that time, Aldine, we were very proud that we were the 12th largest district in Texas then, and we ran about 45,000 students. So I was teaching at one of the large middle schools there, teaching 8th grade science. So I was one of those very proud teachers, very strict on the curricula that I presented, and ensured that my students mastered that before allowing them to move on to the next grade. So took great pride in that work. So after teaching for a few years, I then had the opportunity to join NASA, and I worked at the Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas for approximately 7 years or so. And in that job was truly one of those opportunities of a lifetime where I began as an education specialist, and then I finished my NASA career in the teaching from space office, where we flew projects, if you will, on board Space Shuttle or Space Station at the time. And I had the great fortune to support educator astronaut Barbara Morgan in her flight when she flew. She was the backup to Krista McCullough, a name that you all very well know. So that's sort of a little bit of my high school into my professional career. I am a member of 5, so I have 5 siblings. So I'm the youngest boy in that group, and growing up in rural Texas, I certainly am one that enjoys the great outdoors as such. So that's a little bit about who I am and what I sort of bring to the table.
Well, although I grew up in a very different part of the country, I also went to a relatively small high school. I think we had maybe 500 students in total. Then I attended NC State University, which, similar to A&M, has physics courses of 500 kids in them, right? So I very much appreciate that trajectory. And I'm just still kind of getting over the fact that you worked at NASA. I mean, that's awesome, right? And was that your last job before? Did Brookline poach you? And Brookline didn't poach you out of NASA, did we?
No, not out of NASA. That was a part of the story. So after working at JSC for those years, I then went back into traditional K-12 education and became a middle school assistant principal there again in Houston area in Spring Branch ISD. And then from there, when my wife finished graduate school, we moved up north, and so we transitioned to New York. And in New York, I was an elementary principal, director of science, all the way up to deputy superintendent. And from there, we then transitioned to Boston, the greater Boston area. And most recently, I'm transitioning from the Lowell Public Schools as the chief schools officer. So in that role, I supervised 28 buildings 28 leaders, 25 of those which I directly supervise and evaluate. So, one of the great, exciting parts of that job is that I get to work directly with school leaders who work directly with teachers who directly work with students. And so, having to have that direct level of insight and opportunity to impact the lives of 14,000 students gives me great joy and something that I'm excited about doing so here in Brookline as well.
Well, I will say, understanding the little bit of the story of moving and making homes in new places. Maybe not next week, but soon. My wife and I are going to take you and your wife out for some Southern cooking around here. I know you miss it. We miss it. My wife's from Fayetteville, North Carolina, and so
Oh,
Texas versus East Coast South, not the same, but we'll find some barbecue. We'll find something to chew on. Um, folks Brookline are really excited about you. There's been the school system has been a rocky ride lately, and it's not anyone in particular's fault. It's the combination of success make adding challenges, right? We had tremendous school enrollment growth, and then of course with COVID, we had a dramatic decline in enrollment. We don't know what September is going to look like. So maybe we could start by just share with us, how you think the next 6 months are going to go. What's your vision for kind of settling in and steadying the ship?
I think that's an excellent question, Tommy, and one that I'm giving great thought to. I think what I've been doing since engaging in the Brookline process is certainly attending to as many of the meetings, certainly in the virtual setting, that allows greater opportunity and affords greater time to actually listen, re-listen, rewind the tape, so to speak, and hear things again. So I've been doing that in terms of watching school committee meetings as such, virtually participating in those real time, and then certainly listening again to the parent voice of what their concerns are for the present, but then also then extrapolating what the future, what impact that may have on the future. So Dr. Marini and I have been spending quite a bit of time together as well. So certainly learning from him the work that he's doing in the system presently, and what steps he's taken to sort of hand off in that regard. So we've been doing quite a bit of that work. Also participating in many of the interviews of the existing vacancies within the system. So hiring some of the senior staff members. I've been on the periphery of the newer principal hires. And so Dr. Marini certainly consults with me on those, as well as filling out additional members of the senior leadership team. And then spending some time, a few meetings with some of the community constituents as of right now. And I understand that there's a long line awaiting me. And I look forward to attending to each and every one of those groups or individuals to spend as much time as humanly possible engaging in that dialogue. Um, and I think one of the groups that I actually was connected with during my interview was one of the student groups that's starting or formed out of the high school. Um, During my time when I was interviewing their groups, said they were starting to look at some of the um, areas of concern in the high school. And so that group asked me if I would come to one of their inaugural meeting, and I've attended each of those since. And so we can talk about some of that a little bit later at another time. But sort of hearing the student perspective, what their concerns are, I think that's paramount for me. So once the July 1 timeframe hits, the ground plan that I'm thinking through is what's the entry like? So who are all of the folks? So starting with that level of interviewing that I will need to have. What are the questions that I'm going to ask folks to sort of get their insight into the system? What's sort of what are the collective voices saying independently? What are the voices saying together? And then from there, start laying out what the entry plan or what the vision will be for the coming months. So some of that immediate work is just hearing very deeply what's of concern with folks. Certainly, stability came up in the interview committee, um, in terms of making sure that Brookline pick someone who's going to be committed to them. So I'm very interested in that aspect of the work, bringing joy back to the workplace, also as well as understanding sort of the many financial constraints that are on the system. And so that's something that I want to talk to Tommy a little bit more about somewhat as well, to see how we can make sure that Brookline is getting the funding that it so rightfully and richly deserves. So my 6 months is going to be really, to sum it up, I think in a concise way, is to really get a deep understanding and appreciation for what's presently happening in the system and what are folks thinking about their needs are for the future in that aspect. But that's going to involve a lot of meetings, many, many meetings around that. So, and then certainly with the new leadership team coming on board, there's that team building, that aspect that we need to do. Includes our building leaders as well. So how do we synergize together? And then think about what does September mean for our students and families and our staff members. And so that becomes, those are sort of the three big rocks that I'm thinking about right now.
Well, I do want to hear about September, but before that, I want to hear about the summer. And before that, I actually want to hear about closing out this year. It looks like, fingers crossed, things are getting better and better in terms of COVID, and people are really enjoying getting back to school, having been back in the classroom for quite a number of weeks now. Smooth sailing through the end of the year, right? Looks good.
That's what it looks, from my perspective, it does.
Well, I hope you're right. I think you're right. And I look forward to high school graduation in particular.
Oh,
I know that
absolutely.
I attended graduation last year, and folks really made the most of a challenging situation. Students, faculty, and administrators all. But I think this year will feel really good to do it in person, even in the limited way that it's being done. Tell us a little bit about summer school. It's not a typical summer school, right? When I was growing up, I suspect it was the same with you. If you went to summer school, it's because you pulled a D somewhere and you need to make it up. But that's not summer school this year. Tell us a little bit about how it's going to work.
I can't give you the intimate details of it, but I can give you sort of generally speaking, certainly what we're doing presently in Lowell is giving students and families certainly that opportunity for more time on task and more time with learning. It's also an opportunity to engage in enrichment and stretch opportunities for students as well. So it provides a broad brush stroke for everybody that wants a little bit of something. They'll be able to dabble in it in that regard. And so certainly in Lowell, we've set the summer school up in that manner. And what I'm understanding from Brookline, there will be some access or opportunity for that as well.
That's my understanding as well. And you snuck it in the middle. It's for everybody. It's for
Mhm.
every student, regardless of academic performance, financial means, right? It's public school. It's for everybody. And I think that I think it's one of those things that the Biden administration helped to make happen that he quietly did and moved on without a lot of controversy. And I think it's going to help millions of kids. But that brings us to September, and I know that the state guidance will continue to evolve a little bit, and I know that you've got to both work to the teacher's contract, but also make sure that staff are emotionally on board. Is September? Are we just opening school and masks off just like it was 2 years ago? What do we think is gonna be a little different? Give us some sense, because I, as a parent, I really don't know exactly what September is going to be like, and maybe I don't expect my school to know exactly yet, but I'm really curious and excited.
Well, keep that excitement. Don't lose that excitement. That's certainly something that we want to build towards. I think it's certainly watching the guide. It's certainly the governor's statement or position where he's presently is that we're sort of wide open for things as of now. And we're going to continue to watch the science and the data around what that means for our students. And certainly, I think at this point, what I've heard the Commissioner of Education say is that it's going to be full in-person learning. Now, what that actually means or how it actually looks, I think there's a lot of time between now and September, or now and the end of August, and so we want to be cautiously optimistic, but run a few different scenarios where we'll be prepared for whatever comes our way. And I think that's the best that we can do right now, without having the crystal ball to look into and say, on this particular day, there will be this number of impacted individuals as such. So I think what I would offer is that we're going to have at least three different options in terms of, are we back to business as usual? Are we back to some hybrid approaches to what that reopening looks like? Or are we back to sort of let's come back in with some restrictions? And so I think we just need to be prepared for all of those.
So parents should make sure that their students hand in their Chromebooks, but hold on to their masks.
Now that's
Because we
what
don't
I
know.
so look, let's be ready for it all.
So, I think that's right. I think that we don't know exactly, and I have no doubt that the administration is going to plan for some different scenarios. Acknowledge that, COVID infection numbers were actually rather low in September 2020 relative to 4, 5, 6 months earlier, but they did come back up again. Now, there was no vaccines then, but we don't expect 100% vaccination rate in October, November of 2021. And so we may see an uptick, and it's going to be a real challenge for administration to figure out at what point do we put on, what point do we make some changes versus kind of stay the course and not constantly shift around expectations. Now, I appreciate that some details about Lowell are very different than some details about Brookline from the backgrounds of some of the immigrant communities and so on and so forth. But in some ways, kids are kids and learning is learning. What something about the kinds of kids in Lowell who maybe have struggled or suffered in ways that aren't obvious to our viewers, either because they don't have kids at all or because their kids weren't struggling that way, or maybe their kids were struggling and they didn't even know. Tell us about some of the struggles that kids have gone through, and maybe what Brookline will be able to do, hopefully in the fall, to help those students out in particular.
Yeah, I think, one of the big things here in having an only child at home as well, one of the biggest things that I saw with our little guy, he's will be in third grade next year, is the social aspects of it. We talk a lot about social emotional learning and the needs as such, but just the level of socialization for him, it was extremely hard. And to be an 8-year-old in the house with two adults all the time, not having the kid conversation, it was one of those heart-wrenching moments where there were times when he would go outside and he would sit by the back fence because our neighbors, there are two teenagers that live behind us, and he would just go out to sort of be closer to kids in that sense. And so that aspect of allowing our kids to get back in space, to get back in contact with one another, I think is going to be super important. And how we do that in a way that we as adults don't overly put our fears or place our fears on the kids, but actually listen to and hear them, see them with our eyes, but also hear them with our eyes as well to what their needs are. I think that becomes super critical. So certainly there's been some added benefits, I think, to the budget that have been put in place that will allow additional supports for students and families. But that's sort of what's top of mind for me. And listening to the high school representative on the school committee, meeting Claire talks a lot about the students and their interacting and their being glad to be back next to one another, because in some cases they hadn't had that physical contact or that physical proximity in over a year with their peers. And just that level of interaction does something to their morale. And we can't underestimate the power of that for healthy children. And so that's what's top of mind for me. So when we talk about, some of the challenges, we'll battle each one as they arise, but we'll also try to think and get ahead of those that we can anticipate so that we can make sure that those needs or the needs of our kids are front and center in that regard. And so certainly the same or similar parallel can be drawn with our teachers who are used to doing their craft in person. And, my hat's off to them for spending on a dime and creating environments that did not exist prior to COVID-19. And so while we celebrate the hard work that they've undertaken, we also understand that was a lot of stress and strain on them as well. And so um, their needs are up there paramount as well. And certainly our administrators have been the coaches and life coaches for these individuals. So everyone is drawing upon one another. And so we need to take some of that time to really say, how do we get healthy as the adults in the system to make sure that our students, we can take care of their needs as well.
We've just got time for maybe one more question and a half an answer, and I'm going to take a gamble. I hope this works.
Let's see how good
I
you
want to
are.
end. On uplifting and positive. The weather's getting better. We're getting healthier. Our country's healing in so many ways. Tell us about an experience over the past year that, in some strange way, COVID brought out the best in someone, or COVID helped you realize that something was possible that you didn't even know could be done before. I want to hear a positive COVID story. I know there's not a lot, but I know there's some, and I'm hoping you've got one.
Well, absolutely. One of the things, I'll take a personal moment here. One of the things that COVID actually did for my household is it made us start reconnect with our healthier habits. So it rejuvenated the practices of getting on the treadmill, getting out and exercising, actually shifting our dietary intake as such. And so it made us become more conscious of that as a family unit. And so that's something that we definitely want to carry forward for our own personal being so that we can continue being around for many, many years to come. And so that's sort of the positive spin on it. We weren't one of those households where we were jumping, getting on one another's nerves. We actually cherished the time that we had together, because there's no other point that my wife and I can recall that we had this opportunity to actually shut down. And so we just said, how, in spite of what's happening in the world, how can we look at this through a positive lens, recognizing and not minimizing, the tragic impact that this has had on others. But in our space, we can look back and reflect on this and say we've done some good things as a result.
I love that answer. Thank you. My family was eating dinner together at the dinner table for the first 9 months, until the dinner table is now just covered in Lego bricks and blocks, and there's half-built buildings. And so now we're doing a lot of Lego instead, which has also been really wonderful. Dr. Guillory, I want to thank you for coming on Brookline Interactive and spending some time with us. I know you're so busy, but I also know the community can't wait to get to know you. And I'm very grateful that you shared some of yourself with us today. And I know that you're going to have a good time all summer long, meeting people in person and getting ready for September 2021 when it's all systems go.
All
So
systems go.
thanks so much for coming out.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it, and I'm looking forward to it.